everyone. I hope you've all been doing well. Today I wanted to take you along for this painting process, and I really wanted to talk a bit about my process and everything that went into it. First, I should talk a little bit about my inspiration. So I really wanted to paint something that was sort of reminiscent of stained glass. I've always loved the look of stained glass and Gothic architecture and kind of ornate windows, and so I really wanted to bring that into one of my pieces. Now, I've done this before a few years ago, and while it turned out okay, it didn't quite go how I had planned, and I really wanted to try attempting it again. So I did quite a bit of preparation leading up to the painting itself. I started off with brainstorming, but after kind of writing down a few ideas of what I wanted to portray in this piece, I did quite a bit of research. I looked at lots of pictures of stained glass and windows to try to get an idea for the shape, and even for some of the colors that I wanted to use. I also decided that I wanted to paint magnolias, partially because it is spring, and here in Seattle where I live, magnolia trees are everywhere, and I've been seeing a lot of them when I've gone out for walks, and they're just so beautiful that I really wanted to capture, I don't know, maybe the way that they make me feel or just how beautiful they are. I actually went on a few walks in search of magnolia trees before doing this piece because I wanted them to actually look like magnolia flowers, and I was like, you know what? This is something that I can look at in real life, and while reference photos were still super helpful, especially for more close-up looks, it was really nice getting to see what the actual flowers looked like, even though I couldn't get quite as close as I would have liked. Especially considering that most of them were growing in people's yards, so the best I could do was stand on the sidewalk and maybe take a couple photos. Once I had my subject matter nailed down and I kind of knew how I wanted to move forward, I went and did quite a few thumbnails. I experimented with some different composition, some different color combinations, and really anything that I wanted to figure out before working on the actual sketch. I then went and digitally worked on the sketch on Procreate. One of the things that is super helpful about Procreate is it has a symmetry mode, which is what I did, or used, I guess, to make the frame and make sure that it was even. And then I went through, and I feel like I do my sketching in stages. It starts off messy, and then it slowly, layer by layer, gets a little bit more precise until I feel like I can do final line work. And I looked at a lot of reference photos, and I tried to be really methodical about this. In the past, I've gotten a bit lazy, and then when I actually jump into the painting, I realized my sketch was not as well thought out, and maybe there were some things missing that lead to a lot more problem solving when I'm actually painting, and I really didn't want that to happen this time around. I thought that I did a lot of preparation for paintings before this, but this actually kind of felt like a step up from what I normally do, and I went into the actual painting a lot more confident. Something else that helped was I was actually able to print the line work directly onto the watercolor paper. This is something I actually figured out in my last piece that my printer actually has a particular ink or pigment that is waterproof. And so if I print it super lightly onto the paper, it kind of allows for some guidelines. And because of how many structures there are in this and kind of how intricate I wanted the line work to be, this was super helpful and saved me a lot of time and honestly some hand cramping, especially for the frame. In the past, when I've tried to trace frames like that, it does work, but it takes a really long time and it is quite difficult to get precise. And because I'd already done the work on Procreate, it didn't really feel like cheating that much. Speaking of the frame itself within the painting, I know this was quite a while ago as far as the process went, but I actually decided to paint it with acrylic gouache. The reason for this is I wanted it to be very dark and stand out and look almost kind of graphic, but I also wanted it to not lift. I have found that darker watercolor tends to lift fairly easily and bleed, and I really didn't want to deal with that. I wanted to feel like I could paint washes over this, but also paint knowing where the frame was. So that is why I went with the acrylic gouache, and honestly, it was a great choice. I don't think it's quite as even as it was digitally, but honestly, it looks pretty good, and I think unless you're looking incredibly closely, you can't really see where the wobbly bits are. I also really like the contrast between the super opaque gouache and the translucent light watercolors. Now, as for the actual watercolor parts of the piece, I used a lot of wet on wet techniques. I really wanted the colors to be soft and for there to be pretty smooth blends because I was somewhat trying to imitate glass. This technique also worked really well for the flower petals, where I wanted there to be bursts of pink that slowly faded into a lighter color. It also allowed me to introduce some other colors from throughout the painting. I really wanted the flowers to not stand out too much, or at least not feel out of place. And so I brought little bits of yellow and blue later on to kind of tie it together to the branches. You can also see me dab quite a bit with a paper towel. I did this to kind of soften the blends a little bit and make sure that no part of the painting got too bright. I also found that it really did something for the texture. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but I do feel like it helped. It's not something I usually do in my paintings, but it was quite handy for this one. This process you're seeing here is actually something I did a couple of times. At least for the flowers, I would build up the pink, I would dab, I'd build up the pink again, I would dab with the paper towel and kind of blend it out, and then I would let it dry and then use that wet on wet technique yet again because I really wanted that pink to be quite bright. I also took a few measured risks, for example here, where I decided to do a very light yellow wash throughout the whole painting. I find that doing this kind of adds a certain amount of luminosity, and it kind of brings some of the colors together. It's a little bit more difficult to see on the camera, but when I did this originally, it really helped the branches and the petals not feel so, I don't want to say distinct, but they felt like they belonged together a little bit more. Now, the part I was most nervous about was painting in the line work. Now, I started off with faint lines, more as a guide, but a lot of stained glass tends to have these really thick outlines. Oftentimes they're in black, but they can be other colors too. I decided to opt for like a really deep bluish purple, partially because it matched the tones of the painting a little bit more and was a little bit less intense, but I still wanted the lines to be pretty thick. This was scary because I really liked how it looked before the lines, and I was a little afraid that the lines would ruin everything. But it ended up actually turning out pretty well, and the lines really helped it look more like stained glass and a little less like an actual flower, which is what I was going for, but I was definitely very nervous going into it. There was actually quite a few times that I would actually pause the camera and do a few lines off screen because I needed my face to be like right next to the paper. I needed my hands to be steady, and I needed that intense focus. And occasionally that's a little bit hard for me to do while the film is rolling. But I did try to show as much as I could. I also tried to vary the weight of the lines quite a bit. I wanted there to be darker points, kind of where more shadow would fall, where two objects meet, and a little bit thinner near the edges. This is actually something I've been doing a lot in my art lately. I almost can't help it. I don't know how to explain it, but it's very satisfying. And so I feel like I've been doing that a lot with my line work lately. And I actually think it really helped add some more depth and definition. Now, the one part I didn't plan at the beginning was for the glass pieces behind the flowers. I wanted it to not just look like one big piece of glass, or I didn't want the background to be all the same color. I wanted to show where there were some cutouts and kind of how they pieced together. I tried to use a little bit of logic, and I actually took a picture of the painting and took it back onto my iPad to experiment a little bit. I was just too nervous to mess this up. I'd been working so hard, so I messed around a little bit, and I think it ended up actually turning out okay, but it definitely took a little bit of trial and error. Again, those paper towels and the dabbing came in. I wanted there to be some color variation. I wanted there to be some blues and purples, a little bit of yellow for that luminosity, but I also wanted to include a little bit of pink, almost as if the pink from the flowers is reflecting a bit on the other parts of the glass. This did take a couple of attempts, and again, you did see those paper towels. Oftentimes, I would need to use those to pick up some colors if it became a little muddy. Introducing the pink if I put it in the wrong spot, or if I used kind of the wrong mix of colors, it would look a little bit muddy and dingy, and I really did not want that for this painting. I wanted it to be very colorful and lively. It probably took me close to an hour just on that part and tweaking it a little bit. And the part at the top, I also wanted to make sure that there were different colors present, but that they didn't clash or take away from the rest of the painting. And this is kind of where I felt like it was really starting to come together. It has honestly been a long time since I've been really proud of a piece of work. And in the past, I feel like I've had to redo paintings and that there's a point where I make a decision that kind of sabotages the whole thing. So the fact that that did not happen here was such a win, and I really needed that boost of confidence. I was quite unsure as to how this would all pan out, even though I did all that planning. So for it to actually go well was really quite a relief. And I know I talked quite a bit about the planning process here, but in a few weeks I will be putting out a vlog that shows a little bit more of the behind the scenes and how I did each part, including the printing. I really have been trying to put out videos a little more consistently and vlog a bit more. So I hope that you stick around and that maybe you watch that video when it comes out. I think that I have rambled enough. There's really not much more to add about this process other than I do bring a few colored pencils in just to add a little extra definition near the end. But I'm going to let you enjoy those final details, and I'll pop back in at the very end. And here is the finished product. Not only did I enjoy working on this, but I feel really proud about how it turned out. Lastly, I want to mention that this will be a print. I plan on updating my shop near the end of April, and I'm hoping to have this as well as a few other new things out for y'all. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will see you all next time.